They say nothing really changes in Elowen Falls. Same people, same mountains, same moody lake that reflects the sky like it's trying to impress it. For years, I believed that. My life was built on it, routine, quiet, and soft like the pages of a worn book. For 9 years, Lara and I had our rhythm. Mornings with tea in the newspaper, lazy Sundays painting or hiking the mistwood trails. She'd read while I wrote. We were a cliche, sure, but the kind you frame and hang above a fireplace. Then came Julian Reed. It started subtly, like a wind-shifting direction. Lara landed a job at a flashy new tech startup, Bristle Labs. At first, I was happy for her. After years of teaching art classes to teenagers who only cared about TikTok, she wanted something new. She said this job would challenge her. And challenge us, it did. She came home one evening with this spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in a while. I thought it was joy. Maybe it was. Julian Reed, she said, tossing her coat on our couch, is brilliant in a terrifying way. She laughed, the sound high and breathless, and I smiled weakly. Terrifying's a good trait in a boss, I said, half joking. Keeps the peasants in line. He's not terrifying like that, she replied, her lips curling. He's intense, like you want to impress him or you'll just melt into insignificance. I didn't have a clever comeback for that. I just nodded and sipped my tea, the kind of nod husbands learn to do when they're trying not to stir waters. They haven't figured out yet. Over the next few weeks, the shifts came faster. She started missing dinner. Networking, she'd say, waving it off like I was being dramatic. I'd set a plate for her anyway, wrap it in foil when she didn't show, and start journaling instead. It was better than staring at empty chairs. One night she came home in a dress I'd never seen before. Tight, dark green, and dramatic. She smelled like some cologne that didn't belong to either of us. You heading to the Met Gala or the Mistwood Farmers Market? I asked, trying for humor. She rolled her eyes. It's called dressing up, Mason. You might try it sometime. I didn't say what I wanted to, that she used to love my hoodies, used to wear them to bed like armor. Now she slipped into our sheets like a stranger, smelling of smoke, perfume, and someone else's world. Clara noticed too. She always noticed. She was my best friend, Elowen Falls resident bartender and walking lie detector. She's not networking, Clara said one night while pouring me a free whiskey. She's orbiting something dangerous. You don't glow like that from LinkedIn connections. I let out a laugh I didn't feel. What should I do? Confront her with a LinkedIn printout and a blacklight. Do something, anything, before you become a footnote in her next Instagram post. It was getting harder to pretend. Lara slept with her back turned now. When we touched, it felt like we were acting out roles from a forgotten play. One night I asked, "Are you even here?" She didn't look at me. "Sometimes," she muttered. The next morning she asked, out of nowhere, "Do you ever wonder what it'd be like with someone else?" I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. Like, what kind of someone else? A different breakfast companion or a full-blown swap your life type of thing? She gave me this odd look. I mean, just exploring possibilities. We've only ever been with each other. And you think the solution to that is what, open marriage? I asked, voice rising before I could control it. It's not that crazy, Mason, she said coolly. People do it. With rules. With honesty. This isn't a damn food truck, Lara. You don't just try a sample platter because you're bored with the main course. That turned into a fight. A long, loud one. Accusations flew, old wounds reopened, and by the end of it, neither of us could look at each other. We didn't sleep that night, or the one after. Eventually, I gave in. Not because I believed in it, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if I said no, she'd leave. So we made rules. No dating people from town, no bringing anyone into our home, full honesty. It felt like drawing chalk lines around a dying thing, trying to keep it from rotting any faster. A week later, she smiled for the first time in days and said, "This could be good for us." Good. That word felt like an insult. We spent that weekend apart. She went to a startup retreat that included a beach bonfire and late-night karaoke. I stayed home and reorganized the spice rack because it was easier than crying. One night, I found her sitting on our porch, staring into the dark, barefoot and silent. "Julian's engaged," she said suddenly, "to someone in New York." I nodded. "And yet he still has time to whisper ideas into your ear." She flinched, barely. "I opened a door I never wanted to," I said finally, voice hoarse. "Just to keep you from walking out one completely." She didn't answer. Just looked down at her bare feet, then out at the trees swaying in the night. And I knew, even then, that something had changed for good. Something I couldn't unchange. Lara jumped into our open marriage agreement like a teenager with a fake ID and a sugar high. Within a week, she was posting photos of rooftop bars and beach bonfires, her cheeks flushed with whiskey and approval. I tried not to look, but the images found me, shared by mutual friends or, worse, pushed by the algorithm like it was rooting for my emotional collapse. There she was, clinking glasses with Julian Reed, wrapped in scarves too delicate for Elowen's chill, her smile wider than I remembered. I told myself it was fine. This was the deal. Equal playing field, right? My side of the field looked more like a parking lot. I went on a few dates. A teacher who talked about her ex more than I did mine. A yoga instructor who thought writers were low-energy creatives. A woman named Claire who spent the entire dinner explaining how Mercury retrograde ruined her cat's digestion. Most of these nights ended with a polite hug and too much wine. Once, I got a pity kiss so damp and awkward I wiped my mouth with a napkin as soon as she walked away. Lara noticed, of course. One morning while making coffee, she smirked. "You're not exactly Casanova out there, huh?" I didn't even look up from my mug. "Sorry, I don't treat people like machines. Must be exhausting swiping your emotions like a rewards card." She blinked, the smile fading. "It's not like that." "No?" I said, leaning on the counter. "Because from the outside, it looks a lot like a midlife crisis in lipstick." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She just grabbed her phone and left the house with the same perfume trail and careless shrug I was getting used to. Then came Naomi Jung. It was at the Mistwood trailhead, just after a rainstorm. I was trying to clear my head, boots squishing in the mud, camera slung around my neck more for nostalgia than function. I almost tripped over a tripod. That's when I saw her, short, windswept hair, mud-splattered jeans, and a scowl that could peel bark off a tree. "Watch it, Hemingway," she said, not looking up from her viewfinder. "You almost ruined a red-tailed hawk landing." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know hawks made appointments." She turned to me fully, squinting. "And didn't know authors wore shoes that looked like retired loaves of bread." I laughed. An actual, full laugh. And that surprised both of us. Her name was Naomi, a wildlife photographer working on a short documentary for a nature conservancy. She was blunt, smart, and refreshingly uninterested in my marital drama. Our first hike turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything from tree frogs to bad hotel coffee. We sat on a mossy rock above the lake and she pointed out shapes in the clouds while I tried not to stare too long. Our first kiss was completely accidental. I tripped on a root while trying to hand her a thermos of tea, and we collided, lips and laughter tangled in a clumsy mess that ended with her muttering, "Well, that's one way to spark chemistry." I didn't plan to fall for her. I didn't even think I had room left for anyone. But with Naomi, it wasn't about filling a hole. It was about remembering what warmth felt like. We spent an evening at her cabin, tiny, cedar-scented, scattered with camera gear. That night wasn't wild or desperate. It was careful, like rebuilding something fragile. I didn't think about Lara once. Of course, Lara found out. She saw a photo Naomi had posted, just us on a hill, backs to the camera, the lake stretching blue and wide behind us. At first she laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Wow, that didn't take long," she said. "Glad you're finally keeping up." I didn't reply, but I kept saying Naomi's name, casually, like it wasn't a landmine. Naomi made soup. Naomi saw an owl in Mistwood. Naomi's exhibit opens next month. Lara stopped laughing. Then she stopped going out. She canceled a brunch with Julian, turned down a gala invite. I overheard her crying in the shower one night. I knocked gently, voice soft. "You okay?" "I'm just tired," she said, not even bothering to lie convincingly. I didn't press. Not out of cruelty, just fatigue. Some wounds have to bleed out on their own. A few nights later, we were eating a silent dinner roast chicken and oversteamed broccoli when her phone buzzed. "Julian." She reached for it, but I got there first. "Hi, Julian," I said, voice steady. "She's indisposed. Emotionally, mostly." I hung up without waiting for a reply. Lara didn't speak for 5 full minutes. Then she got up and started cleaning the kitchen with so much force I thought the countertop might sue for assault. Over the next week, she started trying. That was the weirdest part. She cooked breakfast, packed my lunch, even suggested a weekend getaway. To reset, she said. But it wasn't love in her eyes. It was panic. Like she'd realized too late that opening the door meant someone else could walk in. Meanwhile, Naomi and I walked through old-growth forests and talked about things that mattered. She asked real questions. She called me out when I was being self-pitying. She didn't try to fix me, she just saw me. One night, back at my house, I walked in to find Lara sitting on the couch with a candle lit and one of our old photo albums open. She didn't say anything, just looked at me like she was waiting for something I couldn't give her. As I stood there, unsure, I realized something. She had opened a door? Yes. But I found someone inside, someone who reminded me I was still worth being seen. And now? Now Lara was trying to nail that door shut like it was some haunted attic, desperate to trap the ghost she let out. But some ghosts don't want to stay. And some don't haunt, they heal. And that night I knew I wasn't the one trapped in this house anymore. There's something oddly sterile about the therapist's office. Beige carpet, white walls, a single painting of a tree that looked more like a science fair volcano. Lara sat on the left-hand side of the couch, legs crossed, back straight. I was on the right, slouched with my fingers playing with a loose thread on the armrest. The therapist, Joanne, with a kind face and the voice of a kindergarten teacher, asked Lara to begin. She didn't hesitate. I guess it started when I began talking to Julian's assistant. And then there was Cam, the intern. She glanced at me. They talked about how monogamy is this old construct, that we've been trained to believe it's the only way. And I didn't say anything, just let the words float, bitter and light. Joanne tilted her head. Mason, how does that make you feel? I gave her the closest thing I had to a shrug. I'm just tired. Joanne didn't press. Lara did. You can say something, you know. Sure, I said. I just didn't realize our marriage could be redefined by Julian's coffee fetcher and a guy with an infinities tattoo and no health insurance. She flinched but didn't argue. Then, like she'd been waiting for it, she said, Julian and I, one time, we pushed boundaries. My stomach sank, but I kept my face still. We didn't touch. We watched. In a hotel room. It was nothing serious. I stood up. Right, nothing serious. Just good old-fashioned voyeurism at the Holiday Inn. Joanne raised a hand. Mason, but I was already at the door. You want truth? I've had enough of yours for today. The walk home felt longer than usual, the sky threatening rain but never quite delivering. The trees swayed like they were trying to say something, but I wasn't in the mood for nature's metaphors. Clara found me later that evening at the bar, where she poured me a shot before I even asked. She watched him in a hotel room? She asked after I told her. I nodded. Clara blinked, then smirked. So we pitched the Eiffel Tower and she applauded? Classy. I think I might be broken, I said. You're not broken, she replied. You're just finally seeing her without the love lens. It's a cruel view. Ektex, that night I made a decision. If Lara was going to unpack years of messy truths, I'd start cleaning up mine. I started therapy solo. My sessions weren't revelations, but they chipped away at the noise. I talked about Naomi, how she made silence feel safe, how she listened without fixing, how she challenged me without bruising me. I've grown, I told my therapist one day, staring out the window as autumn painted the town gold. But Lara hasn't even noticed. One Saturday morning, Lara showed up in the kitchen holding our old college scrapbook. It was dusty, faded, the cover bent at the corners. She placed it in front of me like it was a gift. I thought you might want to look through it. I flipped a few pages. Our first camping trip. That time we got lost in Portland and ended up dancing in a bookstore. Her hand-drawn sketches of my face. I closed it gently and placed it on the porch beside the recycling bin. A few days later, the town exploded. Julian had been reported to HR for inappropriate relationships and shady misuse of travel funds. An anonymous tip, apparently. He was suspended pending investigation. His fiancée, a model named Brenna from New York, posted a now-deleted story with 3 words, "Done with liars." Clara texted me a link. I just replied, "Karma's efficient when it wants to be." Lara came home that evening with puffy eyes. "He's finished," she whispered, like I hadn't read the news. "They're letting him go." "I'm not shocked," I said. "I didn't know," she said, sitting across from me. "I mean, maybe I did, I just didn't want to." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "We both lost something, didn't we?" "No," I said quietly. "You lost me. I found myself." Her hand froze mid-reach. That's when I knew she still believed we could come back from this, that maybe grief would tie us back together. But grief wasn't glue. It was just proof something mattered and proof it ended. Later that night, I sat on the couch staring at the dark ceiling. I finally asked her the question I'd been carrying for months. "When did I stop being enough for you?" Lara didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "I thought I needed more. I was wrong." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was hollow, like a house after furniture's been moved out. Familiar shapes, but no comfort left. That week, I had a dream. Me and Naomi in a wooden cabin nestled deep in the woods. Snow fell gently outside while laughter echoed through the walls. I was chopping vegetables and she was dancing barefoot to a song I couldn't quite hear. I woke up smiling. One afternoon, Naomi and I hiked up to Hawks Bluff. The view stretched wide. Elowen Lake glittered below, and the mountains rose beyond like gentle giants. She sat beside me on a mossy rock. "What are we, Mason?" I looked at her, at the wind in her hair, the way her eyes didn't demand an answer but invited one. I leaned in and kissed her forehead. That said enough for now. Later, back home, Lara was in the kitchen again, baking muffins that smelled like nostalgia. I walked past her, grabbed my notebook, and sat on the porch. I didn't know what tomorrow looked like, but I knew one thing. I was more afraid of staying out of guilt than leaving for peace. And for the first time in a long time, that fear didn't stop me. I hadn't been back to the house in 3 weeks. Funny how a place can feel like home for years and then suddenly just be 4 walls and old shadows. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. The living room windows glowed dimly, flickering with candlelight like some weird ritual was happening inside. Mist clung to the edges of the street, and the smell of rain-soaked pine hung heavy in the air. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob. Then I stepped in. Lara was sitting on the couch. Our couch, wrapped in the faded gray hoodie she used to steal from my side of the closet. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, barefoot. It was like seeing a ghost of the girl I once knew. The candles around the room were unevenly spaced. Some burned too low, some flickered like they weren't sure whether to go out. "You look like a seance enthusiast," I said, tossing my keys into the old bowl by the door. She smiled weakly. "I was hoping to summon our past." Turns out ghosts don't RSVP. I sat across from her, not too close. The couch between us felt like a courtroom bench. She handed me a glass of whiskey and kept a cup of tea for herself. Classic. I took a sip before she could launch into anything dramatic. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about what we were, about how it all unraveled like bad knitting." I nodded. "I figured you weren't lighting candles for ambiance." She looked down at her hands. "You were home, Mason. I just started treating you like furniture." Something solid, dependable, but invisible. "That's oddly poetic and slightly insulting," I said. "It's true," she replied. "You were always just there, so I stopped seeing you." I didn't rush to respond. Instead, she reached beside her and pulled out a letter. A real handwritten letter, thick envelope and all. She held it out. "From Julian, he sent it last week. Some kind of apology?" I didn't read it, didn't want to. I took it from her, turned it over in my hands. "You know what happens when you keep feeding a fire too long?" She tilted her head. "It burns brighter?" No, it burns everything." I grabbed a candle, held the letter above it. The paper caught slowly, curling at the edges before turning black. She watched it, expressionless, as the flame danced and consumed whatever closure he thought he could send through paper. "You gave him enough oxygen," I said. "Let's not recycle his memory." We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the crickets outside the cracked window, the faint hum of a neighbor's radio. She raised her teacup, and I raised my whiskey. "To the years," she said, her voice trembling. "To the lessons," I replied, and drank. She cried. I didn't. I slept in the guest room that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted that clean separation. The room still smelled like cedar and old books. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how something that once held everything could now feel so hollow. I left before dawn. The next morning, Clara showed up at the house I was moving into. A small lakeside rental with uneven floors and too much charm. She walked in, dropped a bag of muffins on the counter, and sniffed the air. "Smells like you finally got out of her emotional dryer cycle," she said. "Looks like closure," I muttered, setting a box down. "Smells like regret." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you say something profound, or did you just quote a Pinterest breakup board?" I grinned. "Bit of both." That afternoon, Naomi showed up holding a paper bag of warm bread and a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked on the walkover. She kissed my cheek and looked around. "You've got character here," she said, admiring the crooked window frames. "And by that I mean it leans slightly to the left, and I think your kitchen is sinking." "Perfect match for me then," I said, slightly tilted and still standing. We sat on the porch, watching the lake shimmer. The air smelled of moss and old wood, and for once, it didn't feel like the end of something. "I'm broken in places," I said after a long pause. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Cracks let light in, remember?" Later that night, I checked my phone. The town's community group had erupted with news. Julian had been officially fired. Some anonymous Reddit thread laid out everything: his affairs, mismanaged funds, and a weird list of motivational quotes he used at meetings. I scrolled past, didn't react. By morning, Lara's social accounts were gone, wiped clean. No photos, no captions, just silence. It felt more like surrender than healing, but maybe that's where she needed to start. A few days later, her mother called me. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said. "Lara, she didn't handle things well." "I know," I said, "but she needs to figure things out now, alone." She didn't argue. She just sighed and hung up. That night, I sat by the lake with my journal, not writing about pain this time, but about rediscovery. About the smell of bread, the sound of laughter around dinner, the weightlessness of not waiting to be seen. Then came the text. Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it. Lara. I stared at it. No reply. Just locked my phone and went back to writing. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in oranges and blues, I closed my journal and whispered the words I hadn't dared say before. I used to think our love was the story. Now I know. It was only a chapter. Elowen Falls had always smelled like wet bark and old secrets in the spring. Mist clung to the hills like a shawl. The lake breathed fog every morning, and the trees creaked like they were trying to warn or welcome, depending on the day. That morning, Naomi invited me to a falcon release event up in Mistwood. Some wildlife rehab team had been working for months, and now the birds were strong enough to return home. It was fitting, in a very on-the-nose sort of way. Birds flying free? I said as we drove up the dirt trail, windshield slick with drizzle. How poetic. Should we throw in a symbolic monologue too? Naomi grinned without looking at me. Maybe just take the photos and stop pretending you're not deeply moved. I wasn't going to admit it out loud, but she was right. Watching the falcon's wings slice through the fog, its call echoing through the trees, something inside me loosened. Like a tight knot had been slowly working its way free and finally gave up. Naomi stood beside me, rain dripping from her hood, cheeks flushed. When she looked at me, I leaned in and kissed her. Not rushed, not desperate, just steady, real. She laughed softly against my lips. You're dripping. So are my unresolved issues, I said. The trees rustled around us, and for a moment, everything felt easy. A few days later, I saw Lara in town. Outside the bakery, of all places. She was in line, alone, wearing a windbreaker and earbuds. She turned slightly, caught my eyes. There was no awkward pause, no dramatic moment, just a nod. I nodded back. Then I walked on. Later that week, over coffee with Clara, the town's unofficial gossip channel, I got the update everyone had been whispering about. Julian had left Elowen. Word was, he broke down at the bus station crying, apologizing to anyone who'd listen. One person said he tried to pay for a Greyhound ticket with startup equity. Shame isn't heavy until it's public, I said, sipping my latte. Clara snorted. He should have cried on LinkedIn. Better reach. Then she smacked my arm and grinned. Anyway, I've moved on to someone who isn't a disaster. A fireman. I raised an eyebrow. What happened to dating is just emotional furniture shopping. He actually listens, she said, and he smells like ash and tax returns. It's weirdly comforting. I was glad for her. Clara had been my mirror through so much mess. Seeing her happy gave me more relief than I expected. Naomi met my family the next weekend. We drove out to my sister's house near the river, a clapboard cottage surrounded by dogwoods. My sister, Elise, took one look at Naomi and whispered to me in the hallway, "She's grounded. Keep her." My mom served her famous pecan pie, and after Naomi complimented it, she leaned over to me and said, "She's a keeper with a spine. You're not allowed to mess this up." Back at my rental, the mailbox was stuffed with bills, a letter from the insurance company, and one pale blue envelope with Lara's handwriting. I didn't even bring it inside. I drove to Mistwood, walked up the same trail where the falcons had flown free, and burned it right there on a flat stone. The paper curled slowly in the wind. Ash scattered into the trees. Later that day, I hiked alone to the place where Lara and I had once carved our initials into a white pine. It had grown crooked with time, the bark now swelling around the letters. I ran my hand over the rough surface and smiled. "Some scars belong to the land now," I whispered. Naomi and I had our own adventure not long after. What started as a short afternoon hike turned into a full-on detour disaster after we misread a trail marker and ended up 3 miles deeper into the woods than planned. By the time we realized it, the sky was already dipping into twilight, and our phones had no signal. "Well," she said, setting down her backpack, "guess we're sleeping under the stars. Romantic or terrifying?" "Depends on if you snore," I said, spreading out the emergency blanket. That night, wrapped in layers and lying beneath a sky punched full of stars, we shared stories. Silly ones, heavy ones, the kind you save for people who've seen you at your worst. "I didn't expect you," I said into the dark. She turned her head toward me. "Nobody expects rescue," she said softly. "It just arrives." We laughed at the absurdity of it all. The broken beginnings, the side characters, the plot twists. "Our love story sounds like a failed sitcom," I said. "Yeah, season 1 was rough," she quipped. In the morning, we followed the sound of a stream and found our way back to the main trail. Back to the world. Back to something new. That night, as I stood by the window watching moonlight dance on the lake, I let the weight of everything settle. All the cracks, all the wreckage, all the things we buried in that house. I thought my heart had died in that place. Turns out, it was just buried under drywall and broken promises waiting to be found. 1 year later, Elowen Falls looked the same on the surface. Same weathered brick sidewalks, same smell of pine and fresh coffee from the corner cafe, same chatter from shopkeepers who'd known me since braces and awkward hair. But I wasn't the same, and that made the whole town feel a little different. Like someone had turned the volume down on the noise and turned the light up on the parts I actually wanted to see. The bookstore was packed that afternoon, unexpectedly so. Folding chairs lined up, copies of Open Doors, closed windows stacked high on the tables. My first published novel, and people were here to hear me read from it. Still felt like a prank, but Naomi kept reminding me it wasn't. I glanced up as I read from the final chapter. The one about letting go, about choosing peace instead of pride, and saw her. Lara. She sat in the back, sunglasses perched on her head like she might bolt at any moment. I kept reading, even when my voice almost caught. A part of me had imagined this moment, some dramatic confrontation, maybe a heartfelt apology. But life's less theatrical than memory. She stood and slipped out quietly before the applause. I saw her go, but I didn't stop her. After the reading, Naomi came up and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and rain. "You made it beautiful," she said, voice thick with emotion. I looked down at her, this woman who had quietly walked into my life and handed me every piece of myself I'd misplaced along the way. "I was just telling the truth," I said. "Sometimes that's the hardest art," she replied. A week later, while drinking tea on our little rental porch that was held together by too many screws and stubborn optimism, I turned to Naomi. "Let's go to Europe," I said. She blinked. "You mean like the whole continent?" I nodded. This time, no rules, no plans. Just us. Paris, Prague, weird little towns with no vowels. Let's get lost together. She grinned. "Well, I've got a camera and a backpack. You just better keep up." The day after, Clara dropped by with a bottle of cheap champagne and a diamond the size of an oat. "I'm engaged," she announced, holding up her hand like she'd just won the lottery. "To the fireman?" I asked. "No, to a traveling magician who lives out of a van." "Of course, to the fireman," she said. "Turns out trauma is a hell of a matchmaker." I hugged her tightly. "He's lucky." "I know," she said. "I'm delightful." Life started moving in seasons after that. Julian became nothing more than a rumor, a cautionary tale shared over bar drinks. Someone sent me a link to a Reddit thread that claimed he was in therapy and volunteering somewhere in Vermont. I hovered my finger over the post, then scrolled past it. I didn't care anymore. His story wasn't mine to track. Naomi and I found a lakeside cabin on the north edge of town. It had warped floorboards, crooked shelves, and a view that looked like it had been painted by someone in love with silence. We painted the walls seafoam green, arguing over whether it was more blue or green. She said mint with ambition. I said ocean with commitment issues. The nights there were quiet, not empty. We'd cook barefoot, dance to old jazz on the radio, or sit outside watching the stars argue with the clouds. I journaled again. Only now, it wasn't to survive. It was to understand. One day, Naomi walked into the room, cheeks glowing, and held up a letter. My photography exhibit got picked up by a gallery, a real one, big city, actual critics, probably bad wine and overpriced cheese. I stood, hugged her. "They're lucky to have you, and I'm writing your gallery bio." She raised a brow. "Make me sound like I wrestle bears and laugh in the face of capitalism." Done," I said. Then came another letter, but this one was digital, a photo message from Lara. She was standing on a cliff in Patagonia, wind wild in her hair, holding up a tiny paper sign that said, "Learning to walk alone." There was no caption, no follow-up, just that image. She looked lighter. I didn't reply. That night, Naomi and I sat on our porch, wrapped in one of those oversized wool blankets that sheds like crazy but feels like a hug. Crickets chirped. The lake glittered. I turned to her and said, "You were never a rebound, Naomi. You were the next chapter." She didn't respond right away, just pulled the blanket tighter and leaned against me, and I thought back to that house I once shared with Lara. All the words we left unspoken, all the things we tried to fix with silence and space. I thought I'd buried my heart in those floorboards, left it behind with the pictures and chipped dishes. But I didn't. It didn't die in Elowen Falls. It just changed clothes, got a little wiser, and started walking again.